I never imagined I'd spend my 58th birthday watching strangers haul my possessions to the curb. My silver-white hair, the one feature I'd grown to love as I aged, was pulled back in a messy bun, and my hands trembled as I clutched my phone, desperately trying to reach someone, anyone who could help. "Ma'am, I'm sorry, but you need to vacate the premises immediately." The sheriff's deputy wasn't unkind, just doing his job. Behind him stood Martin Whitcomb, my landlord of 15. His arms crossed over his expensive suit, a look of detached impatience on his face. "Martin, please," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "It's my birthday. Can't we work something out? I've lived here for 15 years. Should have thought about that before falling 3 months behind, Caroline." His voice was flat, businesslike. "The court's decision is final." The court's decision he referred to was one I hadn't even known about. The eviction notice had apparently been served while I was in Pittsburgh, caring for my sister after her surgery. I'd returned to find it taped to my door, already past the response deadline. My attempts to explain the situation fell on deaf ears at the county clerk's office. "You have 30 minutes to collect essential items," the deputy said, his tone softening slightly. "Medication, important documents, a change of clothes." I nodded numbly, walking back into what had been my home since my divorce from Richard. This small craftsman bungalow in Portland's Selwood neighborhood had been my sanctuary. The place I'd rebuilt my life after 30 years of marriage ended with the discovery of his affair with his 29-year-old assistant. The rent increases had been gradual at first, $50 here, $75 there. But in the past 2 years, as the neighborhood revitalized, a pretty word for pricing out long-time residents, my monthly payment had nearly doubled. I'd managed by picking up extra shifts at the library and freelance editing work. But when my sister's cancer returned, I'd had to choose between paying rent and being there for her. It wasn't really a choice at all. Inside, 2 movers were already wrapping my dining room chairs in plastic. These weren't generic furniture pieces to them, just items to be catalogued and removed. They couldn't know that the small dining table was where I'd helped my daughter Emma with her college applications, or where I'd sat with my son Michael as he cried over his first heartbreak. "Can I—" my voice caught. "Can I at least get some of my personal things?" One of the movers, a young man with kind eyes, nodded. "Technically, everything's supposed to go into storage, but if you want to grab some small items, I didn't see nothing." I moved through the rooms in a daze, grabbing what I could. Photo albums, my grandmother's silver locket, the quilt my mother had made before dementia stole her memories, my laptop and work files, medications, a few changes of clothes. My mind kept circling back to all I was leaving behind. Furniture I'd saved for, books collected over decades, the pots of herbs on the back porch that I'd tenderly cultivated. My phone buzzed. A text from Emma. "Happy birthday, Mom. Hope you're doing something special today. Love you." I couldn't bring myself to respond. My children didn't know about my financial struggles. Emma was finishing medical school in Chicago, with 2 young children and a husband who'd recently been laid off. Michael was teaching English in Japan, saving for graduate school. They had their own lives, their own struggles. I'd always been the one they leaned on, not the other way around. As I stuffed clothes into a suitcase, my neighbor Diane appeared in the doorway, her face stricken. "Caroline, what on earth is happening? I just got home from work and saw—" She gestured to the growing pile of my possessions on the sidewalk. "Eviction?" I said simply. The word felt foreign on my tongue. "But why didn't you say something? You know Tom and I would have helped. It happened so fast." The lie came easily. The truth, that I'd been too proud, too ashamed to admit I was drowning, was harder to face. Diane's eyes filled with tears. "Where will you go?" I hadn't gotten that far in my thinking. My modest librarian's salary had never allowed for much savings, especially after the divorce settlement barely covered my legal fees, thanks to Richard's expensive attorney. What little I had managed to save had gone to helping Emma with childcare costs and Michael with student loans. A hotel for tonight, then I'll figure it out. Another lie. My credit cards were maxed out from medical bills after I'd broken my wrist last year, an injury my insurance had only partially covered. "Absolutely not. You're staying with us." Diane's tone brooked no argument. "Tom's fixing up the spare room right now. Outside, Martin was speaking with the deputy, pointing at his watch. My 30 minutes were nearly up. "Ma'am?" The deputy approached. "Is there someone who can help you? Somewhere you can go?" I nodded toward Diane. "My neighbors offered her spare room." He looked relieved. "Good. That's good." He handed me a card. "This has information about emergency housing assistance and legal aid, in case you want to contest." "It's too late for that," Martin interrupted, approaching us. "The judgment's been entered." I met his eyes for the first time that day. This man who'd cashed my rent checks for 15 years, who'd once praised me for keeping the garden so beautiful it increased his property value, now couldn't even look at me with basic human empathy. "You know, Martin," I said quietly, "in all these years, you never once asked why I was late. Never once considered that someone who paid on time for over a decade might have a good reason for falling behind." He shifted uncomfortably. "It's not personal, Caroline, it's business. Property values in this area. Save it," I cut him off. "Just tell me where my things are being taken." He handed me a business card for a storage facility. 30 days. Free. Then you'll need to make arrangements. Another expense I couldn't afford. As I walked to Diane's house that evening, my few salvaged possessions in tow, my phone buzzed again. This time it was Michael, FaceTiming from Osaka. "Happy birthday." "Mom?" His smiling face appeared on screen, the neon lights of the city glowing behind him. "Did you get my package?" The package? A beautiful hand-painted teapot he'd sent for my birthday. It was still sitting on my kitchen counter, now being packed away by strangers. "Not yet, honey," I managed, angling the camera up to hide the tears, streaming down my face. "But I'll let you know when it arrives. Are you okay? You look tired." "Just a long day at work," I lied. "But it's so good to see your face." We chatted for a few minutes about his classes, his upcoming visit home for Christmas. I promised to call again soon, and ended the call before he could ask more questions about my day. In Diane's spare room, I sat on the edge of the bed. Finally, allowing myself to fully feel the day's events. 58 years old, and I had been reduced to a few suitcases and the charity of friends. The shame of it burned deeper than the fear. I'd spent my adult life doing everything right. College, marriage, career, children. I'd played by the rules, worked hard, saved what I could. And yet here I was, caught in the machinery of an economic system that had no use for a middle-aged woman with white hair and moderate skills, no matter how conscientiously she'd lived her life. As I finally lay down to sleep in a bed that wasn't mine, one thought kept circling in my mind. There had to be a way to fight back. I just didn't know what it was yet. Morning arrived with the disorienting sensation of waking in an unfamiliar place. For a moment, I stared at Diane's floral guest room wallpaper, trying to remember why I wasn't in my own bedroom. Then it all came flooding back. The sheriff's deputy, Martin's cold stare, my possessions on the curb. I reached for my phone. There were birthday messages from co-workers, old college friends, and a voicemail from Richard that I promptly deleted. Nothing urgent enough to disturb the strange, calm clarity that had settled over me overnight. The house was quiet. Tom and Diane had already left for work. A note on the kitchen counter read, "Help yourself to anything. Spare key on the hook. We'll figure this out together. D." Their kindness nearly undid me, but I pushed back the tears. Crying wouldn't solve anything. Instead, I made coffee and opened my laptop. First, I checked my bank account, 427.30 Tulans. Not enough for a security deposit, barely enough for a week in the cheapest motel. Next, I looked at my calendar. I had the day off from the library, my birthday gift to myself, ironically, but was scheduled for the next 3 days on the reference desk. I needed a plan, and I needed it now. My phone rang. Emma. I considered letting it go to voicemail, but that would only worry her. "Hi, sweetheart," I answered, working to keep my voice light. "Happy birthday, Mom. Did you get my card?" Another item likely sitting in my old mailbox. "Not yet, but I'm sure it'll arrive today. So what are your big plans? Please tell me you're not just sitting at home reading." The irony of her comment wasn't lost on me. "Actually, I'm staying with Diane." And Tom for a few days. My place is being fumigated. The lie tasted bitter, but I couldn't bear the thought of Emma worrying about me when she had her own challenges, medical school debt, 2 children under 5, and a husband struggling to find work. "Oh, that's good you're not alone on your birthday," Emma said. "Hey, have you heard from Uncle Jack lately?" The question seemed random. Jack was my older brother, a real estate developer in Seattle, whom I spoke with maybe twice a year at holidays. He and I had never been close, especially after he'd sided with Richard during the divorce. Not since Christmas. Why? Just curious. He called last week asking for your address. Said he wanted to send you something for your birthday. That was odd. Jack wasn't the gift-giving type. In fact, the last present he'd given me was a blender for my wedding, 40 years ago. Well, if he calls again, you can tell him I've been temporarily displaced, I said, attempting humor. After promising Emma I'd call again soon, I returned to my planning. By noon, I had created a spreadsheet of potential next steps, none particularly promising. Apply for emergency housing assistance, wait lists 6 to 8 months. Find a room to rent, would require last security I didn't have. Ask for additional hours at the library, already working max hours for my position. Look for higher paying job at 58 with no specialized skills beyond librarianship. Ask Richard for help, absolutely last resort. I was contemplating the humiliation of option 5 when my phone rang again. Unknown number. "Caroline Winters," a woman's voice asked when I answered. "Speaking. This is Patrice Goldman from Westbrook Reed and Associates. I'm trying to reach you regarding the Stanley Miller estate." I frowned. "I'm sorry, I don't know anyone by that name." "Stanley Miller was your mother's cousin, correct? Margaret Winters Miller's son?" A vague memory surfaced, a tall man with a booming laugh at a family reunion decades ago. My mother introducing him as Cousin Stanley from California. "I think so, but I haven't seen him since I was a child." "Mr. Miller passed away 3 months ago," Patrice explained. "In the process of executing his will, we've been trying to locate all potential heirs. Your name is listed among the beneficiaries." My heart skipped. Beneficiaries, but I barely knew him. Nevertheless, Mr. Miller left specific instructions. "We've been trying to reach you by mail at your Portland address, but our letters have been returned." Of course they had. The mail forwarding I'd set up after my eviction wouldn't kick in for another few days. "I've recently moved," I said carefully. "What exactly does this involve?" "We need you to come to our offices in Seattle to review the bequest and sign some paperwork. Would tomorrow be possible?" Time is somewhat of a factor. Seattle was a 3-hour drive north. "I suppose I could take the train up tomorrow morning." "Excellent. I'll email you the details and necessary documentation to bring." "And Ms. Winters? Congratulations." After we hung up, I sat perfectly still, trying to process this unexpected development. An inheritance from a distant cousin I'd met once. It seemed too convenient, too much like the plot of a bad movie. Yet the law firm was real. A quick Google search confirmed Westbrook Reed and Associates specialized in estate law and had offices in Seattle's financial district. Was this the universe's idea of a cosmic joke? Evicted on my birthday, only to learn of a potential windfall the next day? Or was it something else entirely? The memory of Emma's question about Uncle Jack nagged at me. I dialed his number, half expecting it to go to voicemail as it usually did. To my surprise, he answered on the second ring. "Caroline, I was just thinking about you. Happy birthday, sis." "Thanks, Jack." I hesitated, then decided to be direct. "Emma mentioned you called her looking for my address." "Ah, yes, I wanted to send you something." "A gift? That's not like you." He chuckled. "People change. Speaking of which, how are things in Portland? Still in that cute little house in Selwood?" The casual way he asked sent warning bells ringing. "Actually, no, I was evicted yesterday." A long pause. "Evicted? Jesus, Caroline, why didn't you call me?" "Would you have answered?" The bitterness in my voice surprised even me. Another pause. "Fair point. But I'm answering now." "What happened?" I gave him the abbreviated version: rent increases, my sister's illness, the missed notice while I was away. "That's awful timing," he said when I finished. especially with the Stanley Miller situation. My breath caught. You know about that? Of course. I'm the one who told Patrice where to find you, or where I thought you'd be, anyway. Jack, what's going on? What exactly did Cousin Stanley leave me? He hesitated. It's not my place to say, but I think you'll want to get to that meeting tomorrow. Need money for the train? I can wire you something. I can manage, I said, pride still intact, despite everything. But I want to know what you're not telling me. Just get to Seattle, Caroline. Everything will make sense then. After we hung up, I stared at my phone, more confused than ever. Jack knew something important enough that he'd tracked down my daughter to find me, something connected to a cousin I barely remembered. I spent the rest of the day in a strange limbo, responding to birthday wishes with forced cheer while my mind raced with possibilities. When Diane and Tom returned from work, I gave them an edited version of events, saying only that I needed to go to Seattle the next day for a potential job opportunity. Stay as long as you need, Diane insisted, hugging me. Your room isn't going anywhere. That night I barely slept, my mind cycling through scenarios, each more unlikely than the last. By morning I'd settled on the most probable explanation. Stanley Miller had left me a small sum, perhaps a few $1,000s, enough to tide me over until I found new housing, but not life-changing. I boarded the early train to Seattle, with tempered expectations and a gnawing anxiety. 3 hours later, I found myself in the lobby of a gleaming downtown high-rise, taking the elevator to the 37th floor, where Westbrook, Reed and Associates occupied the entire space. The receptionist led me to a conference room where 3 people waited. A woman in her 50s I assumed was Patrice Goldman, a younger man with a laptop, and, to my surprise, my brother Jack. You didn't mention you'd be here, I said as he stood to greet me. Thought you might appreciate a familiar face. He gestured to the others. This is Patrice Goldman, the firm's senior partner, and Noah Chen, the estate administrator. Patrice shook my hand firmly. Thank you for coming on. Such short notice, Ms. Winters. Please have a seat. As I sat, Noah slid a folder across the table to me. These are the relevant documents regarding Mr. Miller's bequest. Feel free to review them, but I'll summarize the key points. I opened the folder to find what looked like property deeds. As you may or may not know, Noah began, Stanley Miller was quite successful in real estate development throughout the Pacific Northwest. While the bulk of his estate is being divided among his immediate family, he had specific instructions regarding certain properties he considered separate from his main portfolio. I glanced at Jack, who was watching me with an unreadable expression. One of these properties, Noah continued, is the Selwood Gardens apartment building in Portland, Oregon, the same building where you've been residing for the past 15 years. The room seemed to tilt. What? Patrice leaned forward. Mr. Miller owned your apartment building through a holding company. According to his will, ownership of that property is to be transferred to you, effective immediately. I stared at her, certain I'd misheard. You're saying I now own the building I was just evicted from? That's correct, Noah confirmed. The property includes 6 units, currently valued at approximately $2.8 million. The number hung in the air, impossible to comprehend. But how? Why would he leave this to me specifically? Jack cleared his throat. That's where things get interesting. Stanley wasn't just Mum's cousin. He was her first love, before she met Dad. They had, well, a complicated history. What Jack is delicately trying to explain, Patrice interjected, is that Mr. Miller's bequest came with a letter. She removed an envelope from her files and handed it to me. Perhaps this will clarify his intentions. With trembling fingers, I opened the envelope and began to read. Dear Caroline, you won't remember me, but I've kept track of you over the years through your mother and later through Jack. I know about your work at the library, your children, your divorce, and your recent struggles. The building you've called home these past 15 years has been in my portfolio since the 1980s. When I learned you were living there, I made sure the property manager knew to keep your rent increases minimal, at least until my illness forced me to step back from daily operations last year. I never married or had children of my own. The reasons why are a story for another time, but suffice it to say that your mother was the love of my life, though circumstances kept us apart. In you I see so much of her, Her resilience, her quiet dignity, her fundamental decency. I'm entrusting this property to you not out of pity, but because I believe you'll be a fair and compassionate steward. The building isn't just an asset. It's a home to 6 families who deserve security and respect. Consider this my way of finally doing right, by Margaret's daughter. With affection and respect, Stanley. I looked up from the letter to find all 3 watching me intently. Is this real? I finally managed to ask. Patrice nodded. Very real. There are some tax implications we'll need to discuss, and you'll want to meet with the property management company currently handling day-to-day operations. But yes, as of today, you are the legal owner of Selwood Gardens. Jack reached over and squeezed my hand. Happy birthday, sis. A day late, but who's counting? For the first time since the sheriff's deputy had appeared at my door, I felt tears welling up, not from despair, but from something else entirely. Something that felt dangerously like hope. The train ride back to Portland felt surreal, as if I were moving through someone else's life. In my bag were copies of deeds, tax documents, and contact information for Westside Property Management, the company that had been handling Selwood Gardens for Stanley Miller's estate. Jack had offered to drive me back, but I'd needed the time, alone, to process everything. My phone buzzed with a text from him. Call when you get back. Still can't believe my big sister is a property mogul now. Property mogul. The phrase was so absurd, I almost laughed out loud. 24 hours ago, I'd been homeless, my possessions in storage, my future uncertain. Now I owned a $2.8 million apartment building, the very one I'd been evicted from. According to Noah Chen, the eviction notice had been filed by Westside Management following standard procedures for non-payment. They'd had no idea I was about to inherit the building. Stanley's instructions had been kept confidential until the will cleared probate. What do I do now? I'd asked Patrice before leaving. That's entirely up to you, she'd replied. You could sell the property, hire a management company to continue operations, or take a more hands-on approach. But first I'd suggest you reclaim your apartment. Reclaim my apartment. The thought sent a surge of something like justice through me. As the train pulled into Portland's Union Station, I texted Diane to let her know I was back and would explain everything soon. Then I called the number for Westside Management. This is Caroline Winters, I said when the receptionist answered. I need to speak with whoever is responsible for Selwood Gardens immediately. 10 minutes later, I was on the phone with a very flustered Bradley Kent, regional manager for Westside. Ms. Winters, I cannot express how deeply we regret the misunderstanding, he said, his voice tight with what sounded like barely controlled panic. Had we known your relationship to Mr. Miller? But you didn't, I cut in. And as a result, I spent my birthday watching strangers pack my life into boxes. A terrible error. Please be assured that we're prepared to rectify this situation immediately. Your apartment has not yet been rented to new tenants. We can have it ready for you to move back in by this evening. And my possessions? The ones your company put in storage? We'll arrange for everything to be returned first thing tomorrow morning, at our expense, of course. I thought about making him sweat a bit longer, but decided against it. There would be time for accountability later. I'll be there in an hour, I said. And Mr. Kent? I'd like you to personally meet me with the keys. The cab ride to Selwood Gardens took 20 minutes. As we approached, I noticed my heart racing, not from anxiety this time, but from a strange combination of anticipation and righteousness. The building looked exactly as it had 2 days ago, a well-maintained 1920s Tudor-style fourplex with 2 additional garden cottages behind it. The property occupied a prime corner lot, 2 blocks from the neighborhood's main street. My apartment was on the ground floor, with its own small porch and garden area. Bradley Kent was waiting outside, a tall man in his 40s with the polished appearance of someone who spent most of his time behind a desk. He straightened when he saw me approaching, adjusting his tie nervously. Ms. Winters, thank you for coming, he said, extending his hand. I looked at it for a moment before accepting the handshake. Mr. Kent, I have the keys to your unit, right? Here? He held up a ring with several keys. We've had the cleaning service in this afternoon, and all utilities have been reconnected in your name. I appreciate that, I said, taking the keys. Now I'd like to see the property documents. Rent rolls, maintenance records, tenant information, everything. He blinked, clearly caught off guard. Of course. But normally the transition process takes a few days to... I understand, but these aren't normal circumstances, are they? I met his eyes steadily. I'd like to see everything today. To his credit, Kent recovered quickly. Absolutely. I can have those files sent over within the hour. Would you like to see the other units as well? I shook my head. Not today. I think the tenants have had enough disruption without the new owner invading their privacy without notice. I'll meet them properly tomorrow. Relief flickered across his face. Very considerate of you. I'm sure they'll appreciate that approach. As we walked toward my apartment, I noticed Martin Whitcomb's luxury SUV parked across the street. He was sitting inside, watching us intently. "One moment," I said to Kent, then changed direction and walked straight toward Martin's vehicle. He rolled down his window as I approached, his expression a mixture of wariness and confusion. "Carolyn, I heard you were coming back. There's been some kind of mistake with the management company." "No mistake, Martin. Just a change in ownership." I held up the keys. "I own the building now." The look on his face, pure, unfiltered shock, was something I would savor for a long time. "That's impossible. I spoke with Westside this morning about purchasing. I'm afraid the building is no longer for sale," I cut in. "In fact, I'll be taking a very hands-on approach to management from now on." His face hardened. "Look, Caroline, I'm willing to forget the unpleasantness of the other day. I can make you a very generous offer for the property. More than market value." I pretended to consider this. "That's interesting. Exactly how long have you been trying to buy this building, Martin?" He shifted uncomfortably. "We've been in preliminary discussions for several months." "I see. And did those discussions include strategies for removing long-term tenants so you could convert the units to luxury condos?" His silence was answer enough. "That's what I thought." I stepped back from his car. "My answer is no, Martin. Not today, not tomorrow, not ever. This building is not for sale." I turned and walked back to Kent, who had watched the exchange with poorly concealed interest. "Now," I said, "let's see my apartment." Inside, the space felt both familiar and strange. Everything had been cleaned, the hardwood floors polished to a shine, but it wasn't home yet. Not without my books, my furniture, the small touches that had made it mine. Kent hovered awkwardly by the door. "Is everything satisfactory?" "It will be once my belongings are returned." I turned to face him. "Mr. Kent, I have a question. The other tenants, were any of them facing eviction proceedings as well?" He hesitated before answering. "There was one. Mrs. Abernathy in Unit 3. She's elderly, on a fixed income. She fell behind during the winter when her heating bills were..." "Hi," I nodded slowly. "Consider those proceedings dropped, and I want her account cleared of any back rent or late fees. But that's several $1,000s. Consider it my first official decision as owner." I met his gaze directly. "And going forward, there will be no more predatory rent increases in this building. We'll implement a fair, transparent policy that allows good tenants to stay in their homes." Kent looked like he wanted to object, but thought better of it. "I'll make those changes immediately, and the files you requested should be delivered shortly." After he left, I stood alone in the empty apartment, trying to absorb the reality of my new situation. My phone buzzed. A text from Diane asking if I was okay. "Better than okay," I replied, "coming by later to explain everything and get my things." I walked through each room, mentally placing my furniture back where it belonged, imagining the books returned to their shelves, the plants back on their windowsills. This was still my home, but now it was something more, a responsibility, an opportunity, a second chance. By evening, I had reviewed the property documents and was starting to understand the business I'd inherited. The building generated approximately $14,000 in monthly rental income, with expenses of around $5,000 for mortgage, taxes, insurance, and maintenance. The remaining profit was substantial, more than 3 times my librarian's salary. The next morning, the moving company arrived with my possessions. As they began bringing everything back in, I noticed Mrs. Abernathy watching from her window upstairs. I waved, and after a moment's hesitation she waved back. Once the movers had finished, I took a deep breath and knocked on each tenant's door, introducing myself as both their neighbor and their new landlord. Their reactions ranged from confusion to cautious optimism, especially when I explained my plans to keep rent stable and improve the property without displacing anyone. Mrs. Abernathy cried when I told her about forgiving her back rent. "I've lived here for 22 years, she said, her voice shaking. "I was packing, trying to figure out where to go. You don't have to go anywhere," I assured her. "This is your home." By the end of the week, I had hired a new property management company with better tenant-centered policies, opened a separate business account for the building's finances, and scheduled long overdue repairs that Westside had been postponing to maximize profits. On Sunday afternoon, I invited all the tenants to a small gathering in the courtyard garden, the first time we'd all been together as neighbors, rather than just people who happened to share a building. As I watched them chatting, sharing food and stories, I felt a sense of purpose I hadn't experienced in years. This unexpected inheritance wasn't just about financial security. It was about creating a community, about using this second chance to make a difference in 6 families' lives. My phone buzzed with a text from Emma. "Mom, you've been super mysterious all week. What's going on?" I smiled and typed back, "Remember how you always said I should write a book someday? Well, I think I finally have a story worth telling." It began, "I got evicted at my own birthday. Then I showed up with the title in my hand.